The crimson sun was just beginning to set over the rugged plains of Texas when Olivia O'Brien discovered Lucas Blackett slumped against the wall of the livery stable, a stream of blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Fort Worth in 1878 was no place for the faint of heart, and as the daughter of the town's only seamstress, Olivia had seen her fair share of rough characters. But something about the pale, handsome cowboy clutching his chest made her heart skip a beat. "Mister," she called out, hurrying toward him, her calico skirt gathering dust. "Are you all right?" Lucas's head jerked up, his eyes widening as he hastily wiped the blood from his lips with the back of his hand. "I'm fine, madam," he rasped, attempting to straighten his tall frame. The effort sent him into another violent coughing fit, more blood spattering onto his worn leather vest. Olivia knelt beside him, her honey-brown hair falling loose from its pins. "You're not fine. I'm getting Dr. Hoffman." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't tell the doc," he pleaded, his blue eyes intense despite the pain etched across his sun-weathered face. "I can't afford to be laid up. Got cattle to drive north." "You're getting both of us," Olivia replied firmly, gently prying his fingers from her wrist. "The doctor and me. I'm not leaving you here to die in the dirt. You don't understand." Another cough racked his body. "I understand plenty," she said, rising to her feet with determination. "And I'm not letting a stubborn cowboy bleed to death on my watch." Little did Olivia know that her chance encounter with Lucas Blackett would change the course of her life forever, pulling her into a whirlwind of danger, healing, and a love deeper than the Texas sky. Olivia hadn't always been so bold. At 22, she had spent most of her life helping her mother run their modest seamstress shop on the outskirts of Fort Worth's growing downtown. Her father had died in the war when she was just a child, leaving her mother to raise her alone in a town where respectable work for women was scarce. They had managed to build a steady business, catering to the wives of ranchers and businessmen who needed proper attire for church socials and town gatherings. But there was something about Lucas Blackett that stirred a courage in Olivia she didn't know she possessed. Perhaps it was the vulnerability in his eyes, so at odds with his rugged exterior. Or maybe it was simply that she couldn't bear the thought of walking away from someone in need, even if that someone was a stranger with secrets. "At least let me help you inside," she insisted, reaching for his arm. Lucas hesitated, then nodded, allowing her to help him to his feet. He towered over her, and even in his weakened state, she could feel the strength in his frame as he leaned against her. The scent of leather, horse, and the open prairie clung to him, a smell that was somehow both foreign and familiar to Olivia. "The doc's office is just down the street," she said, guiding him forward. "No," Lucas said firmly, his voice clearer now. "My room. Above the general store, please." Olivia bit her lip, considering. Taking an unmarried man to his room would certainly raise eyebrows if anyone saw them. Her reputation in town was impeccable, it had to be, for her mother's business to thrive. But the urgency of his condition outweighed propriety. "Fine," she conceded. "But I'm still sending for Dr. Hoffman once you're settled." Lucas didn't argue this time, concentrating instead on putting one foot in front of the other as they made their slow way down the dusty street. The evening crowd was beginning to gather at the saloon across the way, but fortunately, most folks were too preoccupied with their own business to pay them much mind. By the time they reached the stairs at the side of Jameson's general store, Lucas was breathing heavily, each exhalation seeming to cost him greatly. Olivia practically dragged him up the steps, grateful for the strength she'd built over years of hauling fabrics and finished garments around town. His room was sparse but tidy, a far cry from what Olivia had expected of a cowboy's quarters. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, A small table with a wash basin and a trunk at the foot of the bed were the only furnishings. "Sit," she commanded, helping him to the edge of the bed. "Where does it hurt?" Lucas sank onto the mattress with a groan. "My chest," he admitted. "Been getting worse for weeks." Olivia's hands fluttered nervously. "How long have you been coughing blood?" "Started 3 days ago," he said, then added with a humorless smile, "Thought I could ride it out." "You can't ride out consumption, Mr. Blackett," Olivia said quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing since she'd first seen him coughing. Lucas flinched at the word. "It's not consumption," he insisted. "I took a bad fall during the roundup last month. Cracked some ribs, that's all." "Then you won't mind if I fetch Dr. Hoffman to confirm that," Olivia replied, moving toward the door. "Wait," Lucas called after her. "You know my name, but I don't know yours." She paused, her hand on the doorknob. Olivia O'Brien." "Thank you, Miss O'Brien," he said solemnly. "Most folks would have walked on by." "I'm not most folks, Mr. Blackett," she replied with a small smile. "Now stay put. I'll be back with the doctor." True to her word, Olivia returned within the hour, Dr. Hoffman in tow. The elderly physician had been reluctant to leave his dinner, but Olivia had been insistent. She waited outside the room as the doctor examined Lucas, pacing the narrow hallway and wondering why she felt so invested in the welfare of a man she'd just met. After what seemed like an eternity, the door opened and Dr. Hoffman emerged, closing it behind him. "Well?" Olivia asked anxiously. The doctor sighed, removing his spectacles to clean them with a handkerchief. "It's not consumption, thank the Lord, but it's not just cracked ribs either. He's got a nasty infection in his lungs. Probably started with those broken ribs and got worse when he didn't rest properly." Relief flooded through Olivia. "But he'll recover. With proper care, yes. I've left him some medicine, but what he really needs is rest and someone to look after him for a few days. He's got no family in town, from what I gather." Olivia bit her lip. "I could check on him." Dr. Hoffman raised an eyebrow. "That wouldn't be appropriate, Miss O'Brien, and you know it. A young, unmarried woman visiting a man's quarters. Tongues would wag." "Then I'll bring my mother with me," Olivia said stubbornly. "Or we can move him to our spare room. We've taken in boarders before." The doctor studied her for a moment, then sighed again. "You always did have a tender heart, Olivia. Talk it over with your mother. But remember, that man in there is a drifter. Cowboys don't stay put." With those parting words, he descended the stairs, leaving Olivia alone in the hallway. She hesitated, then knocked softly on Lucas's door before entering. He was propped up against his pillow, looking marginally better than when she'd found him. The blood had been cleaned from his face, and someone, presumably the doctor, had helped him change into a clean shirt. "Not consumption," he said by way of greeting, a hint of triumph in his tired voice. "So I heard," Olivia replied, remaining by the door. "But you're not out of the woods yet, Mr. Blackett." "Lucas," he corrected. "After dragging me up those stairs, I reckon you've earned the right to use my given name." A faint blush colored Olivia's cheeks. "Lucas, then. Dr. Hoffman says you need rest and care. Do you have anyone who can look in on you?" He shook his head. "The boys from the ranch have already headed north with the herd. I was supposed to catch up once I'd settled some business in town." Olivia squared her shoulders. "Then I'm offering you a room at our house. My mother and I have a spare bedroom we sometimes rent to respectable travelers. You'll recover faster with proper meals and someone to make sure you take your medicine." Lucas's eyes widened in surprise. "That's mighty generous, but I couldn't impose." "It's not an imposition if we're charging you," Olivia interrupted with a practical tone. $2 a week, including meals. That's our usual rate." A hint of a smile played at the corners of Lucas's mouth. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss O'Brien." "Olivia," she corrected, finding herself returning his smile. "And I was raised to recognize a good business arrangement when I see one." "And this is purely business?" he asked, his blue eyes holding hers. Olivia felt that strange flutter in her chest again, but kept her expression composed. "Of course. What else would it be?" Before he could respond, she continued briskly, "I'll speak with my mother tonight. If she agrees, and I'm quite certain she will come for you tomorrow morning. In the meantime, take your medicine and try to rest." Lucas nodded, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "I'll be here," he said simply. As Olivia made her way home through the twilight streets of Fort Worth, she wondered what had possessed her to invite a stranger into their home. Her mother, Margaret O'Brien, was a practical woman who had seen her share of hardship. She would have questions Olivia wasn't sure she could answer satisfactorily. Why did she care so much about the welfare of Lucas Blackett? She had seen plenty of men in dire straits before, and had always been able to maintain a compassionate distance. But something about the proud cowboy who tried to hide his pain had touched her in a way she hadn't expected. It was nearly dark by the time Olivia reached the modest two-story house she shared with her mother on the eastern edge of town. The lower level served as their shop, while they lived in the rooms above. A warm light glowed from the windows, and Olivia felt a surge of affection for the home her parents had built together, and that she and her mother had fought to keep after her father's death. Margaret was at the kitchen table, mending a shirt by lamplight, her fingers moving deftly despite the poor illumination. She looked up as Olivia entered, her face showing immediate concern. "Where have you been? I was beginning to worry." Olivia hung her shawl on a peg by the door. "I'm sorry, Mother, I got delayed." She took a deep breath. "I found a man near the livery stable coughing up blood. I fetched Dr. Hoffman for him." Margaret set her sewing aside. "Consumption?" "No, thank goodness. An infection in his lungs from untreated broken ribs." "He's a cowboy, Lucas Blackett. He was supposed to join a cattle drive, but he's too ill." Margaret's expression softened. "Poor man. I hope the doctor was able to help him." "He was, but—" Olivia hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Lucas has no one to look after him while he recovers. I offered him our spare room." Her mother's eyebrows shot up. "Olivia Rose O'Brien, have you taken leave of your senses, inviting a strange man to live under our roof?" "Dr. Hoffman vouched for his character," Olivia said, stretching the truth slightly. "And I told him we'd charge our usual boarding rate. We could use the extra income, Mother, especially with business being slow lately." Margaret studied her daughter's face. "There's more to it than that, isn't there? Something about this man has gotten under your skin." Olivia felt her cheeks warm. "It's not like that. I couldn't leave him there, alone and ill." A long moment passed before Margaret sighed. "Your father was the same way, couldn't bear to see suffering without trying to help. It was one of the things I loved most about him." She picked up her sewing again. "Very well. Your cowboy can stay in the spare room, but there will be rules, Olivia, strict rules." "Of course," Olivia agreed quickly, relief flooding through her. "And he's not my cowboy." Her mother gave her a knowing look but said nothing more on the subject. "We'll need to air out the room first thing tomorrow, and change the linens." Olivia nodded, already mentally preparing a list of tasks to make their unexpected boarder comfortable. As she helped her mother finish the evening chores, her thoughts kept drifting to Lucas Blackett and the strange twist of fate that had brought him into her life. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring day that made the hardships of the Texas winter seem like a distant memory. Olivia rose early, anxious to prepare the spare room before going to fetch Lucas. She aired out the small chamber, replaced the linens with their best set, and even placed a small vase of wildflowers on the bedside table a touch her mother noticed but diplomatically chose not to comment on. By mid-morning, they were ready. Olivia had borrowed Mr. Peterson's wagon, explaining that they needed to transport a boarder who was under the weather. The elderly shopkeeper had been happy to lend it, especially after Olivia promised him a discount on his next shirt order. The journey to the general store was short, but Olivia's stomach was tied in knots by the time they arrived. What if Lucas had changed his mind? What if his condition had worsened overnight? Her worries proved unfounded. When she knocked on his door, he answered promptly, dressed and looking considerably better than the day before, though still pale beneath his tan. "You actually came," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "I said I would, didn't I?" Olivia replied, stepping into the room. "Are you ready?" Lucas gestured to a battered leather saddlebag and a bedroll in the corner. "That's everything I own in the world. Traveling light has its advantages." Olivia nodded, noticing that despite his attempt at lightness, the effort of dressing had cost him. His breathing was labored, and a fine sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. "Let me take those," she said, reaching for his belongings. "Mother's waiting with the wagon. Do you think you can make it down the stairs?" "I've ridden 16 hours with a broken arm before," Lucas said with a hint of pride. "I can manage a flight of stairs." Despite his bravado, Olivia stayed close as they descended, ready to catch him if he faltered. By the time they reached the wagon, Lucas was leaning heavily on her, his face ashen. Margaret O'Brien, sitting primly on the wagon seat, assessed the cowboy with a practiced eye. "Mr. Blackett," she greeted him with a nod. "You look like you've had a rough time of it." "Madam," Lucas replied, summoning a polite smile despite his discomfort. "I appreciate your hospitality. I promise I won't be a burden." "See that you aren't," Margaret said, but her tone was gentler than her words. "Now let's get you settled before you fall over." The ride back to the O'Brien house was mercifully short. By the time they arrived, Lucas was barely conscious, the infection and fever taking a toll on his already weakened body. It took both women to help him up the back stairs and into the spare room, where he collapsed onto the bed with a groan of relief. "I'll fetch some water and a cloth for his fever," Margaret said, her practical nature taking over. "You start unpacking his things." Left alone with the semi-conscious cowboy, Olivia felt suddenly shy. She moved to his saddlebags, carefully removing the few possessions he carried: a change of clothes, a well-worn copy of Twain's The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, a small leather pouch that jingled with coins, and a folded daguerreotype. Curiosity got the better of her, and she gently opened the photograph to find a portrait of a handsome couple, the man bearing a striking resemblance to Lucas. His parents, she presumed. The woman wore a modest lace collar and a gentle smile, while the man stood ramrod straight in a Union Army uniform. "That's the last picture taken of them together," Lucas's voice, rough with illness, startled her. "Before Pa marched off with the 10th Illinois." Olivia quickly refolded the image. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have pried." "It's all right," he said, watching her through half-closed eyes. "Not much of a private nature in those bags anyway." "Your father fought for the Union," she observed cautiously. The war had ended 13 years ago, but feelings still ran high in Texas, which had been part of the Confederacy. Lucas nodded slightly. He believed in the cause, died at Antietam. A shadow crossed his face. Ma followed 5 years later, influenza. "I lost my father in the war too," Olivia said softly. "He fought for the Confederacy, though, 8th Texas Cavalry." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with shared understanding of loss. "Seems we have something in common then," Lucas finally said. "Both of us left behind." Before Olivia could respond, Margaret returned with a basin of cool water and some clean cloths. "That's enough talking," she declared, shooing Olivia aside to place a damp cloth on Lucas's forehead. "This young man needs rest, not conversation." "Yes, Mother," Olivia said dutifully, but she couldn't help noticing the small smile Lucas gave her before closing his eyes. For the next 3 days, Lucas drifted in and out of consciousness as the fever raged through his system. Olivia and her mother took turns sitting with him, administering the medicine Dr. Hoffman had prescribed and coaxing him to drink broth when he was lucid enough. On the 4th day, Olivia entered his room to find him awake and alert, propped up against the pillows, some color finally returning to his face. "Good morning," she said, setting down the breakfast tray she carried. "You look better today." "Feel better," Lucas replied, his voice stronger than it had been since she'd found him. "Thanks to you and your mother." Olivia busied herself arranging his breakfast, a bowl of porridge with honey, a slice of bread, and a cup of strong coffee. "It's what anyone would have done." "No," Lucas said firmly, causing her to look up and meet his gaze. "It's not what anyone would have done, and we both know it. You saved my life, Olivia O'Brien." The intensity in his blue eyes made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. "You're not out of the woods yet," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "Dr. Hoffman says you need at least 2 more weeks of rest before you can even think about traveling." Lucas frowned at this news. 2 weeks? The cattle drive will be halfway to Kansas by then. "There will be other cattle drives," Olivia pointed out practically. "There won't be another you if you push yourself too hard and end up dead." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "You don't mince words, do you?" "Not when it matters," she replied, handing him the coffee cup. "Now, drink this while it's hot and then try to eat something. Mother's going to the mercantile and I need to open the shop. We'll check on you at midday." As she turned to leave, Lucas called after her, "Olivia, thank you, truly." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and hurried from the room. Downstairs in the shop, Olivia tried to focus on her work. They had 3 dresses to finish by the end of the week for the banker's daughters, and a wedding suit that needed alterations for a Saturday ceremony. But her thoughts kept drifting upstairs to the blue-eyed cowboy who had so unexpectedly entered her life. She was 22 years old, well past the age when most girls in Fort Worth were married with children. It wasn't that she hadn't had suitors. As the daughter of a respectable businesswoman and possessing a quiet beauty herself, Olivia had received her share of attention from the young men of the town. But none had stirred her heart the way the mere thought of Lucas Blackett did now. "You're daydreaming again," Margaret observed as she returned from her errands. "That's the 3rd time you've pricked your finger this morning. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were sweet on our border." Olivia felt her face flush. "Don't be ridiculous, Mother." "I'm just tired from all the late nights sitting up with him." Margaret set down her parcels and regarded her daughter shrewdly. "Olivia, I've watched you turn down the attentions of every eligible bachelor in this town. You've always said you were waiting for something special. I'm beginning to wonder if that something just rode into Fort Worth with a pair of blue eyes and broken ribs." "He's leaving as soon as he's well," Olivia reminded her mother and herself. "Heading north with the next cattle drive. He's made that perfectly clear. Has he now?" Margaret asked mildly. "Or is that what you're assuming because it's safer than hoping he might have reasons to stay?" Before Olivia could formulate a response, the shop bell jingled, announcing a customer. Grateful for the interruption, she hurried to greet Mrs. Thornton, who needed a dress for her niece's upcoming visit. The rest of the day passed in a blur of fabrics, measurements, and polite conversation. By closing time, Olivia was exhausted but not too tired to prepare a heartier meal for Lucas than the broths and porridges he'd been subsisting on. When she entered his room that evening, she found him sitting up in a chair by the window, a blanket draped over his shoulders as he gazed out at the darkening streets of Fort Worth. "You shouldn't be out of bed," she scolded, setting down the tray. Lucas turned to face her, and the genuine pleasure that lit his features at the sight of her sent a warm glow through Olivia's chest. "I was going stir-crazy lying there all day," he explained, "and I'm feeling much stronger." Indeed, he did look better. The fever had broken completely, and though still thin, his face had lost the gray pallor of serious illness. "Well, don't overdo it," she cautioned, moving to arrange his dinner on the small table near the chair. "I've brought you some real food tonight: roast chicken, potatoes, and greens from our garden." "It smells like heaven," Lucas said appreciatively. "I've been dreaming about a proper meal for days." Olivia smiled, pleased by his enthusiasm. "Mother says good food is the best medicine." "Your mother is a wise woman," Lucas agreed, picking up his fork. After taking a few bites, he looked up at her curiously. "Will you stay and keep me company while I eat? I've been lonely up here with just my thoughts." Olivia hesitated. It wasn't proper to remain alone in a man's room, even if he was a paying boarder. But her mother was still downstairs finishing some mending, and the door was wide open. "What harm could there be, for a little while?" she conceded, settling onto the edge of the bed opposite his chair. As Lucas ate, they really talked, in a way Olivia realized she rarely did with anyone besides her mother. He told her about growing up in Illinois, about learning to ride almost before he could walk, and about heading west after his mother's death, drawn by the promise of open spaces and new beginnings. "I signed on with the Bar T Ranch outside of Fort Worth 3 years ago," he explained. "Been riding with them ever since." "And do you like it, the cowboy life?" Olivia asked. Lucas considered the question, setting down his fork. "Parts of it. I love being on horseback, working with the cattle, sleeping under the stars, but it's a lonely existence too, no roots, no family." "Is that why you keep the photograph?" Olivia ventured. "To remember what having roots felt like." A shadow crossed Lucas's face. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just to remind myself that loving people means losing them eventually." The raw honesty of his words struck Olivia silent. She understood that feeling all too well, the fear of attachment because of the inevitable pain of separation. "Not always," she finally said softly. "My father's been gone for 16 years, but I've never regretted a single moment of loving him. The memories are worth the pain." Lucas studied her face in the lamplight, his expression unreadable. "You're an unusual woman, Olivia O'Brien." "So I've been told," she replied with a small smile. "Usually not as a compliment." "It is from me," he said seriously. "Most folks don't think that deeply about things." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then from downstairs came Margaret's voice calling Olivia's name. "I should go," Olivia said, rising quickly. "Do you need anything else before I turn in?" Lucas shook his head, still watching her with that intense gaze. "No, just thank you for the conversation. It's been too long since I've had one worth remembering." As Olivia descended the stairs to help her mother close up the shop, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between her and Lucas Blackett, something that both thrilled and terrified her. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Lucas grew stronger rapidly, soon able to join them for meals at the kitchen table. Dr. Hoffman visited twice more, pronounced him on the mend, but reiterated the need for at least another week of rest before attempting any strenuous activity. "That means no riding, no lifting, and certainly no cattle drives," the doctor emphasized during his final visit. Lucas had nodded dutifully, but Olivia caught the restlessness in his eyes. A man used to the freedom of the open range was bound to chafe at confinement, even in a home as comfortable as theirs. To her surprise, however, Lucas proved to be an amiable patient. He helped where he could, whittling new pegs for the clothesline, mending a loose shutter, even offering to mind the shop one afternoon when both O'Brien women had fittings to attend across town. "I may not know much about dresses," he'd said with a grin, "but I can count money and tell folks you'll be back shortly." It was during these quiet moments, Lucas reading aloud from his Twain novel while Olivia sewed, or the three of them sharing stories over dinner, that Olivia began to imagine what it might be like if this wasn't temporary. If Lucas stayed in Fort Worth. If he became more than just a boarder recovering from illness. Dangerous thoughts, she knew. Cowboys didn't settle down, especially not with plain seamstresses who had never been further from home than Dallas. But sometimes, when she caught Lucas watching her with that thoughtful expression, or when their hands brushed as she passed him a plate at dinner, Olivia couldn't help but wonder if perhaps he was having dangerous thoughts of his own. The question was resolved unexpectedly one evening, nearly 2 weeks after Lucas had come to stay with them. Margaret had retired early with a headache, leaving Olivia and Lucas alone in the kitchen. She was washing the dinner dishes, and he was drying them, a domestic tableau that felt both strange and oddly right. "I had a letter today," Lucas said casually, carefully wiping a plate. "From the trail boss of the Bar T Drive." Olivia's hand stilled in the soapy water. "Oh. They've reached the Kansas border. Cattle prices are good this year." She forced herself to resume washing, keeping her tone light. "That's good news for your employer." "It is," Lucas agreed. A pause then. "They'll be heading back this way in about 3 weeks. Peterson at the general store said he'd hold a spot for me on the southbound stage if I wanted to meet them in Dallas." Olivia's heart sank. Of course. The cattle drive, his job, the life he'd built before he'd ever laid eyes on Olivia O'Brien. She had been foolish to think these quiet days of convalescence meant anything more. "That makes sense," she managed to say, handing him another plate. "Dr. Hoffman says you should be fit to travel by then." Lucas took the dish but didn't immediately begin drying it. Instead, he set it down and turned to face her fully. "The thing is, Olivia," he said slowly, "I'm not sure I want to go." She looked up sharply, hardly daring to hope she'd heard him correctly. "What do you mean?" Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervousness unusual in a man typically so self-assured. "I mean that, in the past 2 weeks, I've started to wonder if maybe there's more to life than moving cattle from place to place. If maybe there's something to be said for staying put." Olivia's pulse quickened. "Staying put where? Here, Fort Worth." He took a deep breath. "Near you." The room suddenly felt too warm, too small, too full of possibilities Olivia had never allowed herself to consider. "Lucas," she began cautiously, "if this is about feeling obligated because we took care of you, it's not about obligation," he interrupted, taking a step closer to her. "It's about waking up each morning and for the first time in years feeling like I'm where I belong. It's about looking forward to dinner not because I'm hungry, but because it means sitting across from you and your mother and feeling like I'm part of something again." Olivia searched his face, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," Lucas said simply. "I know you're brave enough to help a stranger coughing up blood when others would have walked away. I know you're kind enough to open your home to him. I know you're smart and funny and stubborn as the day is long." A smile tugged at his lips. "And I know I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "And what way is that?" Instead of answering with words, Lucas closed the distance between them. Slowly, Giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. When she didn't move, he bent down and gently pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, chaste even, but it sent a jolt of electricity through Olivia that left her dizzy. When Lucas pulled back, his eyes were questioning, uncertain. "That way," he said softly. For a moment, Olivia couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions his touch had sparked. Then, finding her courage, she reached up and twined her arms around his neck. "I think," she whispered, "you might need to explain it again. I'm not sure I fully understood." A grin broke across Lucas's face, transforming it with boyish delight. This time when he kissed her, there was nothing hesitant about it. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as their lips met with newfound confidence. Olivia responded eagerly, her heart soaring with the realization that the impossible had happened. Her cowboy wanted to stay. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Lucas pressed his forehead to hers. "So," he said, "does this mean you might be amenable to me sticking around Fort Worth for a while?" Olivia laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "I think I could be persuaded." "And your mother?" Lucas asked, suddenly looking worried. "What will she say?" "Probably it's about time you two figured it out," came Margaret's dry voice from the doorway. They sprang apart like guilty children, turning to find Margaret standing there in her nightgown and wrapper, an amused expression on her face. "Mother!" Olivia exclaimed, mortified. "I thought you were lying down with a headache." "It improved remarkably," Margaret replied, entering the kitchen fully. "Just in time for me to come down for some tea and find my daughter being thoroughly kissed by our boarder." Lucas straightened, his expression serious despite the flush on his cheeks. "Mrs. O'Brien, I apologize for taking liberties with Olivia, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable. I care deeply for your daughter, and if she'll have me, I'd like to court her properly." Margaret studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I suspected as much the moment you started mending things around the house without being asked." She turned her gaze to Olivia. "And you, my dear, have been humming to yourself for days. It doesn't take a genius to put the pieces together." "You're not angry?" Olivia asked, surprised by her mother's calm acceptance. "Angry that my daughter has found someone who looks at her the way your father used to look at me?" Margaret shook her head. "No, Olivia, not angry at all." She moved to the stove to put on the kettle, then glanced back at the still stunned couple. "However, now that we've established this is happening, there will be rules. No more unchaperoned kisses in my kitchen, for one thing. And Mr. Blackett, if you're planning to stay in Fort Worth, you'll need proper employment. A woman needs a man who can provide." Lucas nodded solemnly. "Yes, madam, I've been thinking about that. I may not know much beyond cattle, but I'm a fast learner." "Good," Margaret said briskly. "Because as it happens, I had a letter today as well. Mr. Thompson is selling the livery stable. His arthritis has gotten too bad to continue. He's looking for a buyer, or at the very least, a manager who knows horses." Lucas's eyes widened. "The livery, that would be." He glanced at Olivia, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Perfect." As Margaret busied herself making tea, Olivia slipped her hand into Lucas's, marveling at how quickly life could change. 3 weeks ago, she had been a spinster seamstress with no prospects beyond the next dress order. Now, she was standing in her kitchen holding hands with a man who made her heart race, planning for a future neither of them had imagined possible. The following morning, Lucas went to speak with Mr. Thompson about the livery stable. By afternoon, they had reached an agreement. Lucas would manage the business for 6 months, with an option to buy if all went well. His years of working with horses on the ranch had given him the skills needed, and what he lacked in business acumen, he made up for in determination. "It won't be the same as the open range," he admitted to Olivia as they walked together that evening, Margaret following at a discreet distance behind them. "But there's something appealing about building something stable, something that could last." Olivia squeezed his hand. "And you're sure you won't miss the cowboy life? The adventure of it all?" Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her. "Olivia O'Brien, I've spent 10 years chasing horizons, never finding what I was looking for. Then I cough up blood in an alley, and a stubborn woman with honey-brown hair refuses to let me die in peace." He smiled down at her. "If that's not adventure enough for one lifetime, I don't know what is." As the weeks turned to months, Lucas proved himself as adept at running the livery as he had been at driving cattle. Under his management, the business thrived, attracting customers not just from Fort Worth but from surrounding areas as well. His fair prices and honest dealing earned him respect in the community, and gradually, the suspicious looks that had followed the newcomer faded away. He continued to board with the O'Briens, though propriety dictated that his courtship of Olivia follow strict rules. They were never alone together without Margaret or another suitable chaperone present, and Lucas was scrupulous about treating Olivia with the utmost respect in public. In private, or as private as they could manage under Margaret's watchful eye, they grew closer each day. Olivia learned about Lucas's dreams of someday owning land of his own, of building a home and raising a family. Lucas discovered Olivia's secret ambition to expand their dress shop into a proper store offering ready-made garments, an innovation she had read about in a Chicago newspaper. "You could do it, you know," he told her one Sunday afternoon as they sat on the porch, Margaret dozing in her chair nearby. "You have the talent and the vision. All you need is a bit of capital to get started." Olivia smiled at his confidence in her. "Perhaps someday. For now, I'm content with things as they are." And she was. For the first time in her life, Olivia felt complete, not just the seamstress's daughter, not just Margaret O'Brien's helper, but a woman in her own right, with dreams and a future that seemed brighter than she could have imagined. 4 months after Lucas had taken over the livery, on a crisp fall evening, he invited both O'Brien women to dinner at the new hotel restaurant, a significant expense that signaled the occasion was special. Olivia wore her best dress, a deep blue creation she had made herself, with tiny pearl buttons down the bodice. "You look beautiful," Lucas said when he arrived to escort them, his eyes drinking in the sight of her. He was dressed in his Sunday best, his usually tousled hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed close. Dinner was a lively affair, with Lucas regaling them with stories of the characters who passed through the livery, from the traveling preacher whose horse was as mean-spirited as he was pious, to the Eastern dandy who couldn't tell a stirrup from a saddle horn. As the meal drew to a close, Lucas grew noticeably nervous, fumbling with his coffee cup and casting glances at Margaret that Olivia couldn't interpret. Finally, as the waiter cleared away their dessert plates, Lucas cleared his throat. "Mrs. O'Brien," he began formally, "I'd like to ask your permission for something very important." Margaret set down her napkin, her expression serious but her eyes twinkling. "Yes, Mr. Blackett, I'd like your blessing to ask for Olivia's hand in marriage." Though Olivia had suspected this might be coming, the actual word still sent a shock of joy through her system. She looked from Lucas to her mother, hardly daring to breathe. Margaret studied Lucas for what seemed like an eternity. "You've proven yourself a hard-working man, Mr. Blackett. You've built a good reputation in town, and more importantly, you've made my daughter happier than I've ever seen her." She nodded once, decisively. "You have my blessing." Lucas's face broke into a radiant smile. Then, to Olivia's surprise and the open-mouthed astonishment of the other diners, he rose from his chair and dropped to one knee beside her. "Olivia O'Brien," he said, taking her hand in his. "From the moment you found me coughing up blood and stubbornly refused to leave me be, you've had my heart. You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a reason to live it fully." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Inside the box was a ring not ostentatious, but beautifully crafted with a small pearl set in gold. "The pearl reminded me of your buttons," Lucas explained, suddenly shy. "I know it's not a diamond, it's perfect," Olivia interrupted, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "And yes, Lucas Blackett, I will marry you. With all my heart, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her, the restaurant erupted in applause. Margaret was dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief, and even the stern-faced waiter was smiling. In that moment, surrounded by the well-wishes of neighbors and friends, Olivia felt a sense of rightness that confirmed what her heart had known since that fateful day by the livery stable. Sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms. And sometimes, the greatest adventures began with an act of simple human kindness. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in December, a compromise between Lucas's desire for an immediate ceremony and Margaret's insistence on proper time to prepare. The entire town seemed to take an interest in the proceedings, with offers of help and gifts pouring in from all quarters. "You'd think royalty was getting married," Lucas commented one evening as they sorted through yet another delivery of handmade linens and kitchen implements. "It's not every day Fort Worth's most eligible spinster snags herself a reformed cowboy," Olivia teased. "People love a good story, and apparently we're it." Indeed, their courtship had become something of a local legend, embellished with each telling. By the latest version, Olivia had single-handedly dragged a dying Lucas 5 miles through a blizzard, nursed him back to health with secret Indian remedies, and then had to fight off a band of outlaws who wanted him for some past transgression. The truth was less dramatic, but no less meaningful to the couple at its center. As the wedding day approached, Olivia found herself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. If she had taken a different route home that day, if Lucas had hidden his illness more successfully, if she had been less stubborn about getting him help, any small change might have led to an entirely different outcome. "You believe in destiny?" she asked Lucas as they walked arm in arm past the livery one evening, inspecting the new sign he had commissioned, Blackett's Livery and Boarding Stables. Lucas considered the question seriously, as he did all of Olivia's philosophical inquiries. "I'm not sure," he finally answered. "But I do believe that sometimes life gives you a chance at something extraordinary, and it's up to you whether to grab hold of it or let it pass by." Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad we both decided to grab hold." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of early snow that transformed Fort Worth into a scene from a Christmas card. The small church was packed to capacity, with even standing room claimed by those eager to witness the union of the seamstress and the cowboy. Olivia had made her own wedding dress, a creamy satin creation, with a lace overlay that had taken her weeks to complete. As she walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Thompson, who had offered to give her away in the absence of her father, she had eyes only for Lucas, standing tall and handsome at the altar. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They had written their own vows, Lucas promising to cherish and support Olivia's dreams as fervently as his own, Olivia pledging to be his partner in all things, through whatever adventures life might bring them. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, and Lucas kissed her with a tenderness that belied the passion she knew he felt, Olivia was certain she had never been happier. The celebration afterward, held in the hotel dining room, lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and laughter, food and drink aplenty, and more goodwill than Olivia had ever experienced in one place. As the night drew to a close, Lucas led his new wife outside to where a carriage waited to take them to their honeymoon destination, a small cabin on the outskirts of town that one of his regular customers had offered for the week. "Mrs. Blackett," he said, helping her into the carriage, the name still new and wonderful on his lips. "Mr. Blackett," she replied with a smile, settling her skirts around her. As the carriage pulled away from the hotel amid a shower of rice and well wishes, Lucas took Olivia's hand in his. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" he asked. "When I told you not to get the doctor," Olivia nodded, her heart full. "I said you were getting both of us, the doctor and me." Lucas raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You were right, you know, I got both. The healing I needed, and the woman I'll love for the rest of my days." As they rode through the moonlit streets of Fort Worth toward the beginning of their life together, Olivia silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led her to find a cowboy coughing up blood on a spring evening, and the courage to stand her ground when he tried to send her away. 2 years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Lucas and Olivia had moved into a modest house near the livery, close enough for Lucas to check on the horses at night if needed, but with enough land for Olivia to plant a garden and dream of someday having children to play in it. The business thrived under Lucas's management. He had indeed purchased the livery from Mr. Thompson 6 months after taking it over, expanding it to include a blacksmith's forge and a small shop selling riding equipment. His reputation for fair dealing and expertise with horses spread throughout the county, bringing a steady stream of customers to Fort Worth. Olivia, meanwhile, had realized her dream of opening a ready-made dress shop alongside the custom sewing business she still ran with her mother. The venture had been risky, but with Lucas's encouragement and financial backing, she had taken the plunge. To her delight and Margaret's proud satisfaction, O'Brien and Blackett Fine Apparel had quickly become a destination for women throughout the region who wanted fashionable, well-made clothing without the weight of custom tailoring. Life wasn't without its challenges. The summer of 1880 brought a drought that threatened the livery business as farmers and ranchers struggled to feed their own animals, let alone pay for boarding. That same year, a fire in the business district came perilously close to the dress shop, spared only by a fortuitous shift in the wind and the determined efforts of the bucket brigade. But through it all, Lucas and Olivia faced each trial together, their bond growing stronger with every obstacle overcome, every triumph shared. It was a crisp October morning in 1881 when Olivia woke with a peculiar sensation. For weeks, she had been feeling unwell, tired, queasy, emotional in a way that was unlike her usual steady temperament. At first, she had attributed it to overwork, to the stress of managing the growing business. But this morning, as she lay beside her sleeping husband, a different explanation occurred to her. She slipped from the bed, careful not to wake Lucas, and went to the calendar hanging in their kitchen. Counting backwards, she confirmed what her body had been trying to tell her: she was late. Very late. A mixture of excitement and trepidation filled her as she prepared breakfast, waiting for Lucas to wake. They had been hoping for a child since their wedding night, but as month after month passed without news, they had learned not to expect too much, not to let disappointment dampen their happiness with each other. When Lucas finally stumbled into the kitchen, hair tousled from sleep but eyes bright with the pleasure of seeing his wife, Olivia could barely contain her suspicion. "Good morning, husband," she said, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before him. "I was thinking we might visit Dr. Hoffman today." Lucas looked up sharply, concern immediately replacing the contentment on his face. "Are you unwell? Is it your headaches again?" Olivia sat beside him, taking his hand. "Not exactly. I'm feeling different, and I've missed my monthly time, twice now." Understanding dawned slowly on Lucas's face, followed by a cautious hope that mirrored her own. "Olivia, are you saying what I think you're saying? I think we might be having a baby," she confirmed, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "But I want Dr. Hoffman to be sure before we get too excited." The caution proved unnecessary. By that afternoon, Dr. Hoffman had confirmed what they had hoped. Olivia was indeed with child, approximately 3 months along. "Everything appears healthy," the elderly doctor assured them. "Though at your age, Olivia, will want to be especially careful in the later months." At 25, Olivia was hardly old for a first child, but she appreciated the doctor's thoroughness. As they left his office, Lucas could no longer contain his elation. In full view of anyone who happened to be on the street, he swept his wife into his arms, spinning her around with a whoop of joy. "Lucas," Olivia protested, laughing despite her embarrassment, "put me down this instant. What will people think?" "They'll think I'm the happiest man in Texas," he replied, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "Which I am." The news spread quickly through Fort Worth, as news tended to do in a town where everyone's business was everyone else's interest. Margaret was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, immediately setting to work on a layette more elaborate than any Olivia had ever seen created. As Olivia's body changed to accommodate the growing life within her, Lucas became even more attentive, if such a thing were possible. No task was too small for him to take on if it meant easing her burden, no hour too late for him to fetch whatever strange food she suddenly craved. "You're spoiling me," Olivia protested one evening as he massaged her swollen feet after a long day at the shop. "I'm loving you," he corrected simply. "There's a difference." The baby arrived on a stormy night in late April of 1882, a robust boy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair that promised to be as unruly as Lucas's. They named him Samuel, after Olivia's father, with Thomas as a middle name to honor Lucas's. "Samuel Thomas Blackett," Lucas said wonderingly, cradling his son with hands that seemed too large, too rough for such a delicate task. Yet there was a natural grace in the way he held the infant, a tenderness that brought tears to Olivia's exhausted eyes. "He's perfect," she whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny fingers. "Absolutely perfect." As Samuel grew, so did the Blackett family's prosperity. The livery expanded to include a carriage service, and Olivia's dress shop became so successful that she hired 2 additional seamstresses to keep up with demand. Margaret, now living in a comfortable apartment above the shop, proudly declared that her daughter had surpassed her in business acumen. When Samuel was 3, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth Margaret Blackett, a fair-haired, serious child who nonetheless had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she first grasped it in the delivery room. "Poor Lucas," Margaret teased as they watched him patiently allowing 4-year-old Elizabeth to adorn his hair with ribbons while 6-year-old Samuel attempted to lasso a chair across the room. "Surrounded by strong-willed women, he doesn't stand a chance." Olivia smiled, watching her husband's gentle interaction with their children. He wouldn't have it any other way. Indeed, as the years passed, Lucas often remarked that his greatest fortune wasn't the successful business he'd built or even the comfortable home they'd constructed on the outskirts of town, but the family that filled it with laughter, occasional tears, and boundless love. On a warm evening in the spring of 1890, as they sat together on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Lucas reached over and took Olivia's hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their 12 years of marriage. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd listened to me that day?" he asked quietly. "If you'd left me alone like I asked instead of insisting on getting the doctor?" Olivia squeezed his hand, considering the question. "I imagine you would have gotten sicker. Maybe died there in that room above the general store. Or maybe you would have recovered enough to join that cattle drive, and you'd be somewhere up in Montana or Wyoming now, still riding the range. And you'd be here in Fort Worth, still running your dress shop with your mother," Lucas continued the thought. "Maybe married to someone else. That banker's son who used to come around with flowers was sweet on you, as I recall." Olivia laughed. "Harold Jenkins? Heavens, no. He was afraid of his own shadow. Besides, by then I already knew what I wanted in a husband, someone brave and stubborn and kind. Someone who would challenge me and support me in equal measure. Someone who would cough up blood at your feet and then try to send you away for your own good." Lucas teased. "Exactly that," Olivia replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I knew you were the one for me the moment you tried to tell me what to do and failed miserably." Lucas chuckled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Best failure of my life." As the sun set over their little piece of Texas, casting long shadows across the yard where Samuel was now teaching Elizabeth how to twirl a lariat, Olivia felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life they had built together. 12 years ago, she had been a spinster seamstress with modest dreams and a practical outlook. Then she had found a cowboy coughing up blood, and in the simple act of refusing to walk away, she had altered both their destinies. "I love you, Lucas Blackett," she said softly, the words still carrying the same weight, the same truth as the first time she had spoken them. "And I love you, Olivia Blackett," he replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Every day a little bit more than the day before." As dusk settled fully over Fort Worth, the Blackett family gathered in their home, not the grandest in town, perhaps, but certainly one of the happiest. And as Olivia looked around at her husband, her children, and the life they had created together, she knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the greatest adventures didn't require riding off into the sunset at all. Sometimes they began with a simple choice to stay.